to Ask RePicture's webinar. My name's Catherine, and I'll be your host today, and I'm a rising senior civil engineering student at the Catholic University of America. And today's webinar topic is the FE, or the Fundamentals of Engineering exam. And Lynn and Aelisa will be answering questions that students have about the FE exam. And Lynn and Aelisa are the co-founders of RePicture and are licensed professional civil engineers. So the first question is, what is the FE exam?
That engineers take to prepare themselves for the PE exam, which is the professional engineers exam. So it's sort of the first part of a two-part process of getting your license, and basically cover a breadth of topics in engineering, and you take it over the course of a day, and it gives you the certificate of engineers in training, which you then take, and you have that certificate for the first couple of years of working, or in some states it's a couple of years, and in some states it's more, before you take the professional engineers exam and get your license.
Next question is, who should take the FE exam?
Most civil engineers take the exam, a lot of environmental engineers take the exam, and even mechanical engineers take the exam. But when you get down to chemical, electrical, industrial, there's a lot fewer people who take the exam. And I think it really depends upon what you want to do with your career, engineer. And if you're going to work in a discipline where you're going to sign documents, you're going to be responsible, the responsible engineer for the project, you're going to want to be a PE, professional engineer, and therefore you should definitely take the FE. I would say in a civil engineer, even if your first job, you think, oh, I don't need that to be a PE, or I don't need my engineering training license, I would suggest you still take the exam, because you never know, later in your career, you might want to change careers, or change what you're doing. And by having your professional engineering exam, which you only can have by taking your EIT, or taking your FE first, is well, typically that's the only way you can do it. But you don't want to limit your options. So I take it if you're a civil engineer, if you're an environmental engineer, take it. If you're one of the other engineers, think hard about whether you might want to someday work in an area where you need your PE.
Yeah, and also that you'll hear some people talking about it as the FE, and some people will say EIT. It's the same thing. It's one exam, the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, and when you pass, you become an EIT, which is Engineer in Training. So yeah. People use it interchangeably, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, and actually, just to clarify there, that like you said, they kind of use it interchangeably. There's one difference, though, is to become an EIT. In addition to passing your FE exam, you have to have typically you have to have 3 years of successful completion of engineering school from the ABET accredited school. So there's that little caveat, but you're absolutely right. And that's what's sometimes confusing when people say FE, they really meant EIT. But it's FE is the exam, EIT is the person.
Okay, so you mentioned that different engineers or certain engineers are more likely to take the FE exam than others. So is there a different test for each discipline of engineering?
Okay. So actually there are different exams based on your specialty. There's 7 different exams you can take, and you're going to decide which one you want to take based on your major. There's a civil, electrical and computer, environmental, industrial and systems, mechanical, and there's other disciplines. So all civil engineers will take the same exam. All environmental engineers will take the same exam, but within the disciplines, there are different exams for each discipline.
The next question is, when should you take the FE exam?
I can start answering this. I didn't know what the EIT was until like my senior year of college, and or I hadn't even heard about it until probably senior year, and someone was like, oh yeah, you should go take that exam and do it while you're in school because everything is fresh. And so I signed up, And I went, and they were like, oh yeah, you're in school, so everything is like still fresh in your mind, so you can just go take it. And I just took that advice and I went and took the exam and I didn't pass. And so, yes, everything was fresh. Everything felt very familiar, but I would just suggest, even if you do take it in school, like to actually formally do the studying and study the material, see what the test is going to be asking you about, and like refresh your mind about all those topics. And yeah, if you're not too overwhelmed and you don't have too big of a, full of a plate in college, it is kind of a nice time to take it, because when you're working, you're working, so your time is full of that. So yeah, I would suggest either in your last year of school, or maybe very shortly after you graduate, sort of while you're looking for your first job, if the timing lines up that way, or very early in your first job when everything is still fresh. But I think I've heard, like, even within a year or a couple years, I finally took it again. I was about a year or two in, I think, to after working. I'd already started working, and so I was studying at night and that sort of thing. And yeah, it went great the second time when I actually looked at what it tested for and actually studied, and knew what was going to be on the exam and things like that. But yeah, I think when it's fresh in your head is the best. When it's more like reviewing and you're just, refreshing your head, as opposed to, oh, I have to like go relearn this because it's been that long. Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, and Aelisa, I definitely agree with what you're saying. In both areas, one is you do need to study for it. Even though you may have just taken classes on it, you definitely need to study for it. I also agree, taking it your senior year. I think even taking it after you graduate, wait and say, oh, I'm going to take it after I graduate, that's a little risky. Because I know a number of people that said, oh, I'm just going to take it after I graduate. And after they graduate, they start their first job and you get busy and it's easy to kind of not do it. Versus while you're in a school, you're still in that studying mode. And so I know some people, and it's great that you actually took it 2 years later, because most of the people I've talked to that never took it say, yeah, I planned on taking it, a year or two after graduation, and I just never got around to it. And that can really impact your career. If you're not in EIT, and then even more important, if you're not a PE, it can really impact your career. So kudos to you that you actually did it 2 years later, but recognize a lot of people think they're going to do it a year or two later and they don't do it. So by just doing it in school, while you're in school, or like you said, maybe right after you graduate, if you don't have your first job, right after you graduate, do it. But don't say, oh, I'm going to do it a year or 2 years from now, because there's a good chance, life's going to get busy for you, even busier than you are right now, and you're not going to get around to doing it.
Agreed. And no matter when you do it, it's an exam. It's like, you have to work hard on it. So yeah, it's just, no matter when you do it, it's going to be like you have to put the time in. It's going to be a challenge. So you just kind of have to suck it up and like do it. So.
Okay, so the next question is, does it matter which state you take the FE exam in?
Yeah, so I can answer that. And the answer is no, it doesn't matter. That's different for the PE. When you take the PE is regulated by state to be the Board of Registration. So when you take the PE, you want to be careful what state you take it in. Otherwise, you might have to take it in a different state. Versus the EIT, you take the EIT, it's good anywhere in the nation. So you can take it wherever you want. It counts for everyone.
Okay, so then the next question is, what is the best way to study or prepare for the FE?
So there's a magical book that everyone used when I was studying for the IT, that it was like the go-to book, and I think it's like Lindenberg. Lynn, do you know? Remember?
Well, I know PPI is a big
yeah.
There are different books you can use.
There are different books you can use, but at least when I took it, there was a book that had kind of everything. And yeah, it's PPI publishes it. They're a major publisher of FE exam prep materials. And yeah, I used that one book and just studied that book exclusively, and used a test prep, like, you know, guide that said, you know, what you should study. I would also really highly encourage a class. I didn't do it for the EIT, but I did it for the PE, and it was great, because you had somebody kind of just telling you exactly what you needed to know and exactly what kind of questions would be on there. And it just made it a lot easier. When I studied for the EIT, I just had that book, and I overstudied. I really studied a lot more than I needed to, probably because I didn't have someone telling me, okay, just study these things. I mean, I really thoroughly did the whole book. So yeah, I would recommend look into what everybody is using, and look into a class if you can. I took the School of PE, and that was really great. So.
Yeah, and I think I definitely agree with what Aelisa said. I think the other thing to consider, because a class, especially if you're taking it while you're in school, it may be hard to take a class. It's expensive, relatively expensive to take a class. What I would do is actually, you can go to the NCEES website, and they have practice exams, and you have to pay a little for them. But I would take a practice exam, see how I did, and based on that, decide, do I need to take a class? I would definitely, like Aelisa said, get the book that everyone uses, study with that. But whether you need to then do the added expense and the added time to take a class, I think it partially depends how you do on the practice exam. If you don't do that, great. Or it also depends on what type of person you are. If you're the type of person that you're not going to study unless you have to, because there's an exam, a class that they're going to expect you every week to come in with answers. If you're that type of person, that's the only thing that's going to motivate you, definitely take the class also. But if you're good at motivating, studying by yourself, you take the exam and you do okay, then maybe you don't need to take the class. But definitely the book, like Aelisa said, and then the class depends upon your situation.
And if you do end up taking the exam after you start working, a lot of employers have reimbursement programs for exam materials and even class fees. When I took the PE, my company paid for me to take the School of PE, and for books and things like that, they reimbursed me. They had a very generous plan. So so if you already started working and you're looking at the PE, definitely look at what your employer provides on that. And yeah, I want to agree very much with what Lynn said, is your own self best and how you will be motivated. Another benefit of a class can be that you meet other people taking the exam. When I took the PE exam prep class, I not only made friends there, but study partners. So we would meet and talk about questions and things like that. So that was also really helpful. And a couple of those people became really good friends that I'm still friends with, by the way. So you never know. It's kind of like when you're in school, you have that informal, I don't know, like all your colleagues are your friends, but at work, sometimes you don't make a lot of friends outside the people that you work with, because that's where you spend most of your time. So I actually found that FE exam class was really fun, because I got to meet other people from other companies and just get to know more engineers from different places. So
it really helped two ways. It helped your get your PE, and it helped your social life.
Yes, that's
pretty
right.
Good deal.
Yes.
All right, so the next question is, how many topics are on the FE exam, and does it vary by discipline?
Yeah, so I can answer that. And the answer is yes, it varies by discipline. So again, if you go to the ncees.org website, you can see all the different disciplines. So for civil engineering, there are, I think it was 16 questions. Environmental engineering, there are 14 questions. And also maybe more equally important, if you look on their site, it will tell you a range of how many questions in each of the topics will be asked. And that is really important for helping prioritize your studying. So, if the topic, only has fewer questions, maybe spend less time on that versus a topic that has a lot of questions, you want to spend more time on that because your score is purely based on 70% correct. And doesn't matter which category those are in, you basically need 70% correct. So, look at those topics to kind of help prioritize what to study on.
Yeah, that was one thing that I found really helpful about the class. Again, I'll say, is they really help you with strategy for the class, for the exam. So helping you to pace yourself, have some strategy for going through the questions, whether it's quickly reviewing all the questions first and marking next to each one, like how confident you feel about being able to answer it, so that you can then go back to those ones that you feel the best about first and get those done. That sort of thing. The class really helped people. The class I took really helped you kind of think about strategies for getting that 70% really, and telling you like these questions are more likely. We've seen these questions over and over again. These questions happen sometimes, but not that often. So you can really focus on the most important stuff and go in order of most important to least important kind of thing. Strategy, the test is about strategy. It's 8 hours long. So you have to have a strategy. It's the most important thing you can do is strategize for the test.
So another question is, how important is your EIT for your first job?
So it depends on the employer, but we at RePicture have looked at hundreds of jobs postings and have found that about half of the job postings for entry level say they either require an EIT or it's preferred. So it definitely broadens your possibilities of first jobs, but it doesn't mean that you can't get a job without it. I mean, you can get a job without your EIT, but yeah, about half of the jobs out there, you wouldn't be able to. Well, some say preferred, but there are some jobs out there that they require it, so you wouldn't be eligible for those.
Yeah, and just to clarify, that was for civil engineering positions, right, Aelisa?
That's
civil
right.
Engineering positions. Again, chemical engineer, biomedical engineer, it's probably not as important as a civil.
Yeah.
What is a PE exam and how important is it after your FE exam?
Yeah, so the PE is professional engineer, which is important if you're going to actually sign documents. If you're going to be basically a responsible professional for designs, you need to have your professional engineer license, your PE. And each state has different requirements. They're pretty similar, but each state basically has their own requirements to be a professional engineer. So if you have any interest in doing design work, anything that has to be signed by a registered engineer, which really means you're doing work where people's lives are at risk, what they want to do is make sure that you have certain education requirements, you have certain ethics, that you have the right background, and that's what the professional engineer does. And like you may not know exactly what type of work you want to do, but even things like doing flood studies in certain areas of the country, you have to have a professional engineer license. So if you're a civil engineer, there's a good chance the work that you're going to do is going to require you to take responsibility for the designs by signing your name. And the only way you can sign your name as a professional engineer is actually take and pass the PE exam.
Yeah, and I would just really recommend doing it because otherwise you could become an expert in your field and be completely responsible and in charge of a project from start to finish, working with the client, developing the plans. And at the end of the day, if you don't have your PE, you would still need to be working under somebody that does have their PE and have that person be involved and sign off. So it's just a lot easier for everyone. It's more valuable for your company. They can promote themselves as having, you know, a certain number of PEs in their office. And when they go to propose, you know, write proposals for projects, it looks good for them that you're a PE. So, and it's required. They need a PE for a lot of the work that they're doing. So, yeah, it's good for you, good for the company, and good for the clients. It's good all around if you can be responsible and charge in that way.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Aelisa. I saw several engineers who basically limited what work we could give them and limited their career because they never got their PE. And like Aelisa said, there are a number of projects, so you have to be a PE. In order to be the manager of that project, you have to be a PE. And so we had people that we thought were qualified for it, but they didn't have their PE, so we weren't able to do that. And that, like I said, really limits their ability, their career. So definitely PE is very important in civil engineering, environmental engineering, certain types of mechanical engineering, anything that has design associated with it, it's really important.
Is there anything about the PE that you need to consider around the time you take the FE?
Yeah, and I can start with that. I think there are a couple, two things I think of that you want to think about now. And I know the PE, it might sound, oh, it's years off from now, but one is, in order to qualify for the PE, you have to work under a PE. So that means is when you're starting your first job, you want to make sure that there's a PE, a licensed professional engineer, in that office that you're going to be able to say you work under, because otherwise you're going to have a hard time actually getting your PE. So that's one thing to consider is just your first job. Make sure it's something you can then qualify for your PE. The other is, and this actually dawned on me the other day, because when you get your PE, for each location where you get your PE, you have to basically show that you have so many years experience. And I think Aelisa maybe can talk California may be a little different, but where I've got my PE, which is South Carolina, Vermont, Maryland, Virginia, you had to have 4 years experience, and you had to show the specific experience, engineering specific experience you had. You couldn't just say, oh, I worked at company X. You had to say, I worked at company X. At company X, this is the exact engineering work I did. And you have to give enough details so that the reviewer knows this was really engineering you were doing. It wasn't, you know, non-engineering. And that could be really hard. I mean, to try to remember what you did, you know, several years earlier, or if you got your PE in one state and then you decide to get your PE in another state later in your career, you still have to remember what you did in that first job. So this came to light when I had a gentleman who emailed me. I was his supervisor in 1996, I believe it was. So 23 years ago. And I had to certify, he had to indicate what engineering he did on what projects 23 years earlier. And luckily, he had taken some notes, so he was able to give 3 example projects and talked about, okay, these are the models he ran, this is the detail he ran. But that can be really challenging, and I know it was challenging for me when I was trying to get my license, or my license in Vermont 20 years later. And so that's one of the neat things that Aelisa and I are doing with the RePicture.com, is that we're and we're using the information to help students understand what engineers do by having engineers indicate this is what they did on different projects throughout their career. But it dawned on me when this gentleman was having to remember what he had done 23 years earlier, and that the RePicture.com can really be an opportunity to help you keep that log of what you did, so that 4 years from now, 20 years from now, you can basically see this is the engineering I did, these are the projects I worked on earlier. And then not only is it going to help you with your PE, it's going to help, like I said, what we're doing with this information is helping students understand what engineers actually do. So again, the 2 things to think about is make sure you work under a PE, a licensed PE, and the other is consider, regardless of whether you use RePicture.com or not, keep track of where you've worked, what you've done, what engineering you've done, so when you go to fill out your PE license, you have that information.
Yeah, all excellent points. And the also want to add for the listing all your experience. It's not just talking about what you did over the year. It's generally they want you to talk about a specific project and what you did on that project and how long did you work on that project. And each project that you work on, you have to list a PE supervisor. So you could be working under a PE, but then, I don't know, different companies have different, organization or whatever, but I've worked on projects for other managers, not my own manager at times. And I had to go to that manager to get them to sign off. Or you could also talk to your manager. Could you sign off? Would you be willing to sign off on this work? If, for example, that other manager is not a PE, that could happen as well. So yeah, it's project by project, and generally they want you. So again, that leads to what Lynn was talking about, keep track of your projects and share what you're doing about your projects with your projects. And RePicture is a great way to do that. And then the other thing I wanted to add is that there's a lot of overlap with the FE and the PE. So any sort of notes that you create for the FE, particularly your kind of like cheat sheet notes where you summarize, a concept or things like that. If you're organized about it, you can use those again for the PE, or at least use it as a starting point to study for the PE. So I would recommend, if you can, be organized about your note taking and just all your exam materials, and they could come in handy again as well for when you take the PE. Oh, and one other thing is some states you have to practice for longer than other states in order to take the PE. So, particularly for those states where you have to work for 4 years under a PE before you can take, under a PE before you can take the PE, that's when it's really critical that you keep, it's very helpful to you rather that you keep track of what you're doing over those 4 years. In other states, like I think California, I don't know if other states, it may just be California, but you only have to work for 2 years, so it's a lot easier. And it's probably, even the FE is more fresh in your head when you take the PE. I know back east, it's 4 years, so when I took the exam, I remember just scratching my head, like, what did I do 4 years ago? I don't know. And yeah, it was very helpful to have some notes on that. So
just so it doesn't make it sound like it's easier to get your PE in California, it's actually extremely hard to get your PE in California, right. Because even if you're a water resources engineer, you need to know about earthquakes in California for the California PE. So it's harder actually to get your PE there.
Yeah, there are 2 specialty exams. We could probably do another webinar just on the PE, but it doesn't hurt to start thinking about it when you're in school and thinking about the FE, because in California, there's 2 extra exams you have to take, and one is a seismic exam and one is surveying. Each is about 4 hours. Each is 4 hours. So yeah, you have to prepare for that. There are classes, but like I wanted to take the California exam, but in college I didn't take any seismic classes, so I'm learning seismic for the first time. So if you're in California, it's probably helpful for you to start thinking about that as well. Even as you're taking the FE, is you're going to have to be doing a seismic. If you can squeeze in a class in college on seismic, it will be very helpful for you. Surveying shouldn't be a problem. I think most engineering, especially civil engineering majors, have to take surveying as a prerequisite, but you'll find all those principles are very, very familiar, but the seismic stuff is a little bit different.
This is the last question, and the last question is there anything about the PE that you need to consider around the time you take the FE? Okay, thank you for joining RePicture's FE exam webinar. Thank you to Lynn and Aelisa for answering all our questions. And if the audience ever has any questions or are interested in being a guest host for RePicture's webinars, contact info@repicture.com.
And if you have any, if you have any questions for RePicture that you'd like us to answer on a future webinar, send them our way.